Hello and happy holidays to everyone at the Barrington Area Library. I'm Natalie Bovis from the Liquid Muse, and I'm excited to be here to share a little cocktail know-how with all of you so that you can bring the spirit of the holiday season into your home bar. Going with a spice and chocolate theme, I'm next going to do a drink that might sound a little crazy when you first hear it, but trust me, it's delicious. We are doing a chocolate and chili margarita. We're going to start by rimming, our margarita glass with a spicy mix, but we first will moisten the rim of the glass with a lime. So cut the lime in half and just rub it on the rim of the glass. Now, I typically don't rim the whole glass. I like to just have a little taste of the rimmer. I don't necessarily want it with every sip. So I do about a third, and you could just do a little tiny bit and get it on the edge of the glass, and then it looks like a lipstick kiss, especially when you're using something like red chili. So this mix that I'm using is a mix of Chimayo red chili made here in New Mexico, and I like to mix that with sugar and salt. This is a really fun holiday gift you can give your friends too. I get little jars. I mix the dried ground red chili with kosher salt and with white granulated sugar. It's fantastic on the rim of a cocktail glass. It's also really great with food. I sprinkle it on chicken breast. You can put it on salmon. It's got a little spice. It's got a little salt. It's got a little sweet. So I love giving these out at my live cocktail classes, and they're really great little holiday gifts. Now, here's one thing. I'm gonna serve this drink on the rocks, meaning over ice. So I'm going to put some ice in my glass now. This is going to do a couple of things. It's going to start to chill this glass, which will keep the drink colder longer. And the other thing is we're going to shake the drink with ice, but we don't want to shake and then slump all of that water and already melting ice into our glass. When we shake cocktails, our hands are heating up the cocktail shaker. That means that as we're shaking, we're agitating the ice, it's breaking down the ice is starting to melt more quickly. We want that in the drink. But then we want to strain that liquid out, so we're stopping the dilution of the drink. Because if you just slosh all of that into a glass, that ice is melting very, very quickly, and it's going to water down your drink very fast. People call that bruising the drink. I don't really like the term bruising. It doesn't make any sense to me. But what you're doing is watering it down. So I think that's another fun little mixology tip that you can apply to lots of drinks that you serve on the rocks. So we're going to use half a lime. I'm getting my citrus press, and I'm getting another piece of lime in my little bowl here. And we're putting cut side down. Citrus press has holes in it, and the cut side goes on the holes, so the juice can squeeze out very easily. So I'm going to squeeze that into I'll measure it, because I want about 3/4 of an ounce. So I have my jigger here. I'm using this kind of jigger. You can use any sort of jigger. I want 3/4 of an ounce. Now these limes that I have are a little on the small side. Half a lime can often give you half an ounce, but that one only gave me 1/4 of an ounce, which is why I wanted to measure it, because being smaller limes, I wasn't quite sure how much juice I was going to get. So I cut 2 little limes versus 1 big lime. Okay, now we're pretty close to 3/4 of an ounce. Just put a little smidge more. Boop. I like my margaritas quite limey anyway. I'm going to pour this into my mixing glass. I like these 2-part shakers. This is called a Boston shaker. It has a mixing glass, and that's the clear pint glass. When you're building the drink in the glass, it's great for you to have the visual cues of how much liquid is in there. When you start to make a lot of cocktails, you can kind of eyeball. I can look at this and know that's about 3/4 of an ounce without even measuring. So the more you're making drinks, the more the visual cues come in. Also, when you're making drinks for friends, I think friends, just like guests at a bar, really kind of enjoy seeing the drink being made. And so when you're making it in a clear mixing glass like this, they can watch and you can talk about it. And I don't know, it just makes it, part of bartending is the entertainment factor. You are entertaining your guests, right? You're a home entertainer in more ways than one. And so having them brought into the process of you making a cocktail for them, it's part of the show. Okay, the next thing we're gonna do is we are going to muddle some jalapeno. This is our spicy part of this drink. So I cut some slices of jalapeno. Now again, I like spicy, so I have quite a bit. I have about 6 slices of jalapeno in there. And now I'm gonna get my muddler. I like this kind of muddler because it has the teeth on the bottom. This is extremely handy when you are muddling things like jalapeno or herbs or berries because it'll help break them down. You're not mashing this into a paste. We are looking to extract the oil from the skin of the jalapeno, maybe crush the peppers, seeds a little bit, because we want the spice, we want the flavor, we want the juices from the flesh of the jalapeno. We don't want a big mushy mess. So press and twist. This is about what it should look like if you're following along at home. Okay, now I'm going to add about 1/2 ounce of orange liqueur. A margarita typically is going to have 3/4 of an ounce. You will put about as much liqueur as you do lime juice. So I'm only putting about half, I'm actually putting a little bit less than 1/2 ounce of the orange liqueur because I am also using Ohm chocolate liqueur. Ohm stands for Organic Mixology. In full disclosure, it is my baby. This is my liqueur. It's sweetened with organic agave nectar, and it is purposely created to not be overly sweet. So I'm going to actually go ahead and put a full 1/2 ounce of this as well. So chocolate might sound strange in a margarita, but it's really not if you have a chocolate liqueur that is not too sweet. So I'll put this one aside. And then I'm going to use a Reposado tequila. I happen to be using Cazadores, which I like. I don't work for Cazadores. I just am using this one because I have it here at my house. And it's a brand I enjoy. But any Reposado brand of tequila that you like. 1.5 ounces of Reposado tequila. Okay, so Reposado means rested. Tequilas are in basically 4 age categories. You have the Blanco. That is an unaged tequila. That is a tequila that has been, it can go into a barrel for up to 2 months maximum to still be a Blanco. Once a tequila has sat in a barrel for, say, 6 months, it is now considered reposado or rested. And you'll notice it has just a hint of amber color in this liquid. It's not clear like water. That color comes from the wood. So anytime a spirit is aged in a wood barrel, it's getting color as well as flavor from the wood. If you put it into oak barrels, which are most typically used, the oak will impart a little bit of vanilla, a little bit of coconut, and those flavors get into the spirit that is in the barrel, as does some of the color from the wood and deepen the color, give it a little bit of an amber hue. So that is reposado. The next level of aging is añejo. Añejo means aged, and that means it's been in the barrel up to a year. And then extra añejo is longer than that, say 1 to 3 years. Don't really, I personally don't like tequila that's left longer than that in a barrel, longer than 3 years, because you lose so much of the agave flavor. Tequila is made from the agave plant, specifically from the Blue Weber agave plant, and only that plant. Just like how champagne can only come from one region of France, everything else is sparkling wine or cava from Spain or Prosecco from Italy. Tequila comes from the Blue Weber agave plant and only from Mexico. So now in this mixing glass, we have our jalapeno, we have the orange liqueur, we have our chocolate liqueur, we have our lime juice, we have our tequila. And so I'm going to add the ice, and I'm going to give this a nice strong shake. Now you remember, when you're using a Boston shaker, the lid goes on at a slight angle. Give it a little tap, do the magic, make sure it's sealed. It's a good party trick here. Flip it over and start shaking with a great big smile. Give your drink a little bit of extra love. We're not shaking like this, by the way. That's amateur hour. We're shaking loud and proud, back and forth, so the ice is hitting both ends of the shaker. All right, fantastic. We're gonna pop that off, get our Hawthorne strainer, which holds back all the little bits of jalapeno and ice, and I'm gonna strain this over the fresh ice in my glass. Now, take a look at that baby. You could add a lime wheel on here if you want a bit of extra flair, a little, little extra garnish. The garnish should have something to do what's in the drink, so a lime wheel would make a lot of sense because there's lime juice in the drink. When we taste, keep in mind, we taste first with our eyes. So look at this. We have this really fun rimmer on the edge. We have a gorgeous colored sort of deep gold margarita. That is from the lime juice, that's from the orange liqueur, it's from the chocolate liqueur, and it's from the reposado tequila. And then, that bright, fresh agave smell. You get a little bit of jalapeno, fresh jalapeno, a little bit of cocoa from the Ohm chocolate liqueur. And now we're gonna take a sip. Oh, my goodness. I hope you all are liking this as much as I am. I really hope you share this with your friends and family over the holidays if they're margarita drinkers, because this is a really fun twist on a drink that everybody knows and loves. While everyone is enjoying their spicy chocolate margarita, I'm going to tell you a little bit of history about tequila because it's such a fascinating topic. Some of you might have heard some of this before if you've attended my previous classes, but I think it's kind of worth a mention again for anyone who's new. The goddess Mayahuel was the Aztec goddess, a fertility goddess, sometimes called the goddess with 400 arms, sometimes called the goddess with 400 breasts. And the reason why she was referred to that way is, first of all, she's a fertility goddess, said to have mated with the Aztec god Quetzalcoatl. And their babies were said to be these agave plants. Down in Mexico, there are all sorts of different kinds of agave plants. Something that you might not realize is that tequila is actually a kind of mezcal. Now that mezcal has gained so much popularity, people tend to say, oh, I like tequila, oh, I prefer mezcal. But it's kind of like saying, oh, I like scotch, oh, I prefer whiskey. So just as whiskey has like scotch and bourbon and rye whiskey and Canadian and Irish and Japanese, etc., all these different kinds of whiskey, it's that way with agave spirits. So mezcal means agave spirits made from the agave plant, born from the goddess Mayahuel. The Aztec people, they use the agave plant in many different ways. So the agave plant, the Blue Weber agave specifically, would grow to be about, maybe 6 feet in diameter. You have this big plant, looks like a yucca, with a lot of thick arms growing out. And then a long stalk. It takes 8 to 10 years for a Blue Weber agave to mature. So by the time that plant is mature, someone who is called a humidor, that's the name of the worker who goes into the fields to harvest the agave, the humidor will go into the field with this tool. It looks kind of like a shovel, but the bottom part is a big round blade. And I say he because it's usually a man. It's really tough labor intensive work. He will go in and hack off the arms of this plant all the way around. And what's left is this sort of the inner part of the plant, which looks like a big drum, and it looks like a pineapple. So it's called the piña. The core of this plant is called the piña because it looks like a pineapple once you've hacked off all the arms. So this thing can weigh like 40, 50 pounds. I mean, the big ones are really very heavy. And they will then be taken to the distillery and processed. So, this is really where the distiller's art and skill comes into play, because that distiller will decide, will he or she bake the piña? Will they roast the piña? Will they steam the piña? How you treat the piña is going to have a huge influence on its flavor, on the flavor of the juice that comes out of it. It's very hard when you put it in to cook, kind of like an apple, right? If you have a fresh apple and then you steam it, bake it, or roast it, it'll go in raw, hard, and then when you cook it, it'll be soft. And if you were to press that apple after you cook it, the juice, the flavor, will have a lot to do with the way you cooked it. So that's a lot like these piñas. So you get the piña of the agave plant, you cook it in whichever way, press it, and now you have the juice from this plant, and it's then fermented, meaning introduce yeast, which then eats the sugar. The byproduct of that is carbon dioxide and alcohol. So this is now fermented. It's essentially an agave wine. And then that agave wine will go through the still, and this is how we create the spirit. So the best example of distillation is to describe how a pot still works. The most rudimentary, the first kind of still. So that would be 2 pots. One pot over a fire, or overheat, you would put the agave wine into this pot and heat it. It would have a little cap on it with a tube called the cooling tube, which then drips into the other pot, which is cool. And so as that fermented liquid heats up, the alcohol rises more quickly than water vapor. So the vapor, or the spirit, if you will, lifts out of the fermented agave wine, and as it goes through this tube, it's captured here, goes through the tube and liquefies. So what comes out on the other end into the other pot is pure alcohol. That's how spirits are made. All spirits that are distilled, that's the basic process. Now, later we had column stills, where this sort of process is happening on plates up and down, and got very industrial. Not going into all of those details, it's just important that you understand how distillation works, so you know how spirits are made. All spirits come out clear, whether you're talking about rum, brandy, tequila, vodka, everything comes out clear. And then it gets its color either by people adding color to it, depending on whatever spirit or liqueur, but whatever they're making, or maybe macerating it. Maybe, if you're making a raspberry liqueur, you get a spirit, and then you'll add the raspberries and, mash them up, sort of like, I guess, industrial muddling, and let it all soak together, and maybe add some sugar to that, and, whatnot. And so, et cetera, et cetera. Back to tequila. Tequila was not popularized in the United States until really it began to be smuggled in during Prohibition, which was 1920 to 1933. The cocktail was born in the United States. The cocktail was created in New Orleans in the early 1800s. And so it's a truly American invention. And cocktail culture really grew and flourished around the U.S. as you had all these little western towns, but settlers who were going across the U.S. in their wagons and whatnot. Every little town they would come into, you'd always have a saloon, a jail, and a place to sleep, right? The inn above the saloon that maybe had the ladies of ill repute who hung around up there. They also had a church, so you could go, get forgiven the next day for all the things you might have done in the saloon or the inn the night before on your way to jail. But anyway, alcohol obviously was available in all of these saloons. Maybe they weren't doing the fancy cocktails quite so much in the Wild West. But by the time you got to places like California, the more refined, sort of like more long settled places, during the gold rush, we actually have, or that era, we have our first bartender really on record, a man by the name of Jerry Thomas, who I guess we could call the first cocktail book author. Jerry Thomas wrote down his recipes, which is why we know who he is today. Jerry Thomas was a very big character. He was an entertainer. He was behind the bar of his saloon. He was, making cocktails. So he wrote down his cocktail recipes in the 1800s. This is how we know, we have some record of what was going on during that time in cocktail culture. 1920 to 1933, well, we had that horrible thing called Prohibition. Hold on, I'm going to take a little sip of my drink here. Alcohol was illegal. That doesn't mean people didn't drink it, as we know. There were the rum runners and, people making their own alcohol and dying because it's a very fine art and skill and technique to make alcohol that can be deadly. But a lot of the people who were the Jerry Thomases, he was dead by that point, but, the Jerry Thomases of the Prohibition era, they left America and many went to Europe. And so, for example, if you've been to the Savoy Hotel in London, they have their lobby bar, a really fancy place called the American Bar. And a lot of that has to do with the American bartenders of that era leaving and going to Europe and bringing cocktail culture with them. Let's pause there and let's make another drink. No celebration is complete without a sparkling cocktail. So I'm going to make one that's a little bit different. I'm using sloe gin as the base for this. Now, sloe gin to me is kind of like a spirit meets a liqueur. It's a little bit sweeter than a normal spirit. It's a gin-ish infused with sloe berry. So you really get the flavor of the sloe berry more than juniper or anything else like that. I'm also using some pomegranate juice, bitters, and some sparkling wine. So I am going to start off with about 3/4 of an ounce of pomegranate juice. I'm going to add several dashes of bitters. You could just add 1 or 2. I like a fair amount of bitters in my drinks. Next, I'm going to put some sloe gin. I'm putting about 1.5 ounces. I'm eyeballing this because I make drinks a lot, but if you are not sure, use your jigger to measure 1.5 ounces. It's about there. All right, now I'm going to shake this part with ice. Obviously, we don't want to shake the sparkling wine because we'd make it go flat. All right, I'm using a Boston shaker, giving a tap on the lid, doing the magic to make sure it's sealed, flipping it over and giving it a big shake with a big smile, infusing a lot of love. Alrighty, now we're going to pop the top, and I'm going to strain this into my martini glass. I chose a martini glass for this. You could also use a coupe. You could use a flute if you want to, although I prefer martini glasses or coupes for sparkling drinks because I like the bubbles to tickle my nose. If I'm using a nice sparkling wine, I want to smell the aroma. All right, now then, we're going to top it with this sparkling wine, which has been chilled. I'm using a little bottle because I'm just making one for me, so no point wasting all of a whole bottle because I will not get through a whole bottle of sparkling wine all by myself. And then we have a beautiful little orange twist as a garnish. I just cut a piece of orange. I took the rind off of it and I twisted it around my finger and then I tightened it up. And it made this, I'll show you, this beautiful little, whoops, I want to drop it, beautiful little orange twist. and then it just pop it right on the side of the glass, right on the rim there. So cheers for this beautiful little holiday drink. Actually, it's great any time of year. Whenever people migrate throughout history, right? Whenever people migrate, they are bringing with them their food, their drinks, the way they celebrate, the way they mourn, the way they gather. And, for us as travelers, myself anyway, whenever I travel, I love to see what people are eating and drinking. I love to see the way they celebrate. I love to see their cemeteries. So after Prohibition, we have the Great Depression, we have World War II, we have all sorts of things going on in the world. In the 1950s, vodka becomes popular. We start to see drinks like the grasshopper and the pink squirrel and all these sort of, cute little vodka drinks. Vodka doesn't have a lot of flavor by itself, so it tends to be part of a cocktail that has liqueurs, sweetening agents, flavoring agents, cream, etc. Anything that kind of gives the alcohol a bit more pizzazz, right? In the 80s, I was a teenager in the 80s, but there were things like Jungle Juice. I mean, that was like the post-disco era. It was the more is more. You had a lot of vodka drinks actually at that point. People were not really drinking a lot of gin or brandy. Those were thought of as like their grandparents' drinks or grandparents' spirits. People would just have like vodka with a lot of sugar and a lot of neon colors and like pucker, apple pucker and watermelon pucker and like all this kind of stuff and lots of juice. So it's just like the booze and anything to cover it up. It wasn't really until the 90s, actually in London, where this cocktail revival came back in London first. So there were these sort of people scattered around different countries, and they were doing some of the old-timey cocktails, and these people kind of found each other, and suddenly modern cocktail culture was born. I came into mixology. I mean, I had worked in restaurants since the 80s as a busser, then a waitress, then later a bartender and cocktail waitress. But I learned about mixology in the mid-2000s. And at that time, I was a freelance writer. I started a cocktail blog, The Liquid Muse. That's where my mixology beginnings were, my real mixology beginnings. And I was so interested in the history of cocktails and all of this like crazy stuff. And so I was blogging about it and started writing cocktail books, etc., etc. I love teaching. That's why I'm speaking to you all today. I think it's really, really fun. If you're into food, you're probably into wine, which means you're probably into cocktails. And there's just so much rich history there. On that note, I will pause and say one thing. I am providing mocktail versions of the cocktails we're making today. So for example, the sparkling drink that we just made, this drink can be made without the sloe gin. You can just make it with a pomegranate juice. You can still use bitters. Now, if you're somebody who is completely alcohol averse and afraid of bitters, that's fine. Bitters are really just, it is alcohol, but using a few drops of it, and it's macerated with bark and botanicals. It's really more of a flavoring agent. So depending on where you fall on the alcohol spectrum, you may or may not want to use bitters. But the pomegranate juice, the bitters, and you could use a non-alcoholic sparkling wine to make this drink. And we're going to be making a spicy espresso chocolate martini. That drink, you can leave out the alcohol and just use espresso, maybe use, you could use a chocolate milk if you want to make it creamy instead of a chocolate liqueur. You can use a spicy syrup. So there are always alternatives to alcohol for people that want mocktails versus cocktails. My very first book, back in 2008, my first book was called Pregatini's Mixology for the Mom-to-Be. It is a mocktail book, of course. I actually just wrote the new version because 15 years later, it needed to be revamped, and that new version will come out probably in 2024. But, I'm a big proponent of mocktails and balance and enjoying a cocktail, but also having alternatives. So if you have any questions about mocktails, or gee, I really like this cocktail, how can I make this into a mocktail, or something like that, feel free to email me, Natalie@theliquidmuse.com. So cocktail culture hops back over, starts with Milk and Honey in London, comes to New York with the second outpost of Milk and Honey in the 1990s. You know, cocktail culture really took off, obviously, in New York first. It kind of hopped over to San Francisco, which is another real foodie town. And then it kind of went to like Chicago and Boston, and you know, I was living in Los Angeles in the 2000s, so around 2007, 8, it started to really hit LA. And of course, here we are, you know, I'm recording this at the end of 2022. And I think everybody in America has heard of mixology, has heard of cocktails and classic cocktails, and maybe wants to learn a little bit about how to make them. It's really fun to delve into the history of all of these things because, gosh, I could just talk for hours about details, but for the sake of this course, I'm going to wrap it up here. I am going to make one final drink with you, and then we are going to part ways. The espresso martini was first created around 1983, but it has made a comeback, like a crazy comeback. You cannot go to a restaurant, hotel, or mixology bar without seeing an espresso martini on the menu. So this drink is going to be a little twist on that. I'm doing a spicy chocolate espresso martini. I'm going to start with Ohm. It is organic. It has a nice rich cocoa flavor, and it's intentionally not overly sweet. So I'm going to put a full ounce of this Ohm chocolate liqueur, found at organicmixology.com, into my drink, because this will not make it too sweet, but it'll give it a nice rich cocoa flavor. Next, I'm going to use a liqueur that I really like. This is Ancho Reyes, and it's a chili liqueur. I don't work with this brand at all. I just happen to really like it. I'm going to put about half an ounce of the Ancho Reyes spicy liqueur. Now I'm going to put about an ounce and a half of vodka. Now you can do variations of this drink using brandy, using rum, using pretty much any other spirit that you want. Tequila, a nice reposado tequila. I'm going with the more traditional recipe, but you can get as creative as you want to because the chili and the chocolate go with a lot of different spirits. And finally, I have about an ounce and a half of espresso, which I'm going to add to the mix. I've added the ice into my mixing glass. Shake a little love into your cocktail. Ready? What's really fun about this drink is that I haven't even added any dairy into it, but I've got this nice froth that comes from shaking it with the espresso. Now, at this point, you could garnish this drink with a few little chocolate-covered espresso beans, with some chocolate shavings, with some whipped cream. You really could dress it up any way you like. Ooh, I made this one really full, but I'm gonna have it just like this. You could also add a little bit of cream or non-dairy creamer into it, coconut cream, if you want it to be a creamy drink. Ooh. Oh my gosh, this is so yummy. So the story behind this drink is that there was a relatively famous bartender called Dick Bradsell, and that a model, some say Kate Moss, wandered into his bar around 1983, and she asked for something that would pick her up and mess her up, but the word began with an F. Pick her up and mess her up. And apparently that's how he came up with this idea for the espresso, the alcohol, and I love adding the bit of chocolate, a little bit of spice, This would be a really fun drink maybe after a holiday meal. It could also be really fun with brunch. Or, you know, just sitting around, chatting with family and friends, catching up with everyone for the holidays. So here we are, 3 new drinks for your holiday entertaining. I want to thank Kelly Avila for inviting me back to be part of your fun group. And all of you at the Barrington Area Library, I hope you have a wonderful holiday season. Feel free to reach out to me at theliquidmuse.com. My new book is coming out in January, Drinking with My Dog, the Canine Lovers Cocktail Book. Very excited about that, as I will be donating to animal shelters every time I do a book signing. I'll be doing book signings in LA, Chicago, New York, Phoenix, obviously New Mexico, where I live now, and all around. So please, if you would like to attend a book signing, you can get on my mailing list at theliquidmuse.com. And I hope you all have a wonderful new year. Thanks again for having me.